Sometimes the smallest mistake becomes the loudest truth you will ever hear. Nathan Reynolds had built a life that magazines love to celebrate. At 39, the billionaire founder of Reynolds Capital appeared on the cover of business journals, donated millions to children's hospitals, and occupied a penthouse overlooking Manhattan where every window reflected a version of success that seemed impossible to question. Investors admired his discipline. Employees respected his fairness. Reporters called him the man who never made emotional decisions. Yet none of those people knew that every night, just before falling asleep, he still wondered what had happened to the only woman who had ever convinced him that peace mattered more than ambition. 8 years earlier, Amara Brooks had quietly disappeared from his life without a goodbye that made sense. She had never answered another message. Her apartment had been empty. Friends claimed they did not know where she had gone. Eventually, Nathan accepted the explanation everyone repeated. She must have chosen a different future. He buried the questions beneath longer workdays, larger business deals, and a schedule so demanding that loneliness could barely find room to breathe. Shortly after midnight on a rainy Tuesday, while reviewing documents for the largest acquisition in his company's history, Nathan's cell phone vibrated across his desk. The number was unfamiliar. Normally he ignored unknown callers, but something made him answer before the second ring. A woman's tired voice came through the speaker. "Hello, I am sorry to call so late. Is this Riverside Pediatric Clinic? My son has been running a fever since this afternoon, and I am not sure whether I should bring him in tonight." Nathan opened his mouth to explain that she had reached the wrong number, but the sound of her voice stopped every word before it could leave him. 8 years disappeared in an instant. He knew that voice, softer now, more mature, carrying a quiet exhaustion that had not existed before, but unmistakably hers. His heartbeat slowed instead of racing, the way it always had whenever Amara spoke. He closed his eyes for one brief moment, almost afraid that memory was playing another cruel trick. "Amara?" he asked carefully. Silence answered him, then a quick intake of breath. "I am sorry," she replied after several seconds. "I think I dialed the wrong number." Before Nathan could say another word, the call ended. He stared at the dark screen, convinced he had imagined everything. Then he looked down at the call log. The number remained there, real and undeniable. For several minutes he did nothing except listen to the rain striking the windows behind his desk. Thousands of thoughts collided inside his mind. Why had she sounded frightened? Why had she mentioned a son? Why had she disappeared all those years ago without a single explanation? Most of all, why had fate chosen tonight, of all nights, to place her voice back into his life through something as ordinary as a wrong number? Nathan pressed the redial button almost immediately. The call connected once, then went straight to voicemail. He tried again. The same result. By the third attempt, the telephone had been switched off completely. Across the city, somewhere beyond the rain and the sleeping skyline, Amara Brooks had vanished once again before he could ask a single question. Nathan slowly closed the acquisition files lying open across his desk. For the first time in years, the deal waiting for him the next morning no longer felt like the most important decision of his life. Somewhere in New York, the woman he had never truly stopped loving had whispered only a few sentences, and those few sentences had quietly shattered the perfect future he had spent 8 years convincing himself he wanted. Sleep never came that night. Nathan Reynolds remained seated beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, while the city's lights slowly surrendered to the pale gray colors of dawn. His untouched coffee had grown cold hours earlier, and the acquisition documents that should have demanded every ounce of his concentration now lay forgotten across the conference table. Instead, one unfamiliar telephone number occupied the entire screen of his phone. He had memorized every digit before sunrise. He dialed again shortly after 6 o'clock. The call rang once before another automated message informed him that the subscriber was unavailable. Nathan leaned back in silence, frustrated not because the number remained unreachable, but because hearing Amara's voice had reopened questions he had spent nearly a decade forcing himself to bury. 8 years earlier, they had planned a future together that felt remarkably ordinary despite his extraordinary wealth. Amara had never been impressed by private aircraft, luxury hotels, or exclusive charity galas. She preferred quiet bookstores, neighborhood coffee shops, and long walks through Central Park, where no one cared who Nathan Reynolds happened to be. She once told him that genuine happiness was measured by the conversations people remembered long after expensive gifts were forgotten. Nathan had laughed at the time, convinced he already understood what she meant. Looking back now, he realized he had only understood the words, not the lesson behind them. At precisely 8 o'clock, his executive assistant reminded him that investors from London had already arrived for the largest acquisition meeting in Reynolds Capital history. Nathan entered the boardroom wearing the same tailored suit he had prepared the night before, but his attention drifted repeatedly toward the telephone resting face down beside his notebook. The financial presentation proceeded flawlessly. Attorneys explained regulatory details. Investment bankers projected future growth. Normally, Nathan noticed every statistic before anyone else in the room. Today, he heard almost nothing. During a brief recess, he quietly stepped into the hallway and opened the call log again. Acting on instinct rather than strategy, he forwarded the unfamiliar number to the private investigations division his company occasionally retained for corporate security matters. Less than 30 minutes later, his security director returned the call. "The number is registered to a prepaid mobile account," he explained. "There is no listed owner. However, our search indicates the telephone was activated less than 3 months ago, somewhere in Brooklyn." Brooklyn. Nathan repeated the word silently. It was the first real clue he had received about Amara in 8 years. Meanwhile, several miles away in a modest apartment overlooking a tree-lined street, Amara Brooks placed a cool washcloth across the forehead of an 8-year-old boy sleeping on the living room sofa. Elijah's fever had begun easing before sunrise, but she remained close beside him, checking his temperature every hour. Her own telephone rested on the kitchen counter, powered off after the accidental call. She had recognized Nathan's voice the instant he quietly spoke her name. Hearing it again had shaken her far more than she wanted to admit. For several minutes after ending the call, she had stood motionless in the darkness, wondering whether fate had simply played another cruel joke. She never intended to contact him. She had only been searching online for the overnight pediatric clinic after Elijah complained that his head hurt. One wrong digit had reopened a chapter she believed would remain closed forever. When Elijah finally opened his eyes, he smiled weakly. "I feel better, Mom." Amara returned his smile, relieved to see the color slowly returning to his face. "That is all I wanted to hear." Elijah looked toward the switched-off telephone on the counter. "Did you ever reach the doctor?" Amara hesitated before answering. "No," she said softly. "I reached someone from a very long time ago." Elijah accepted the answer without another question, but Amara could not silence the memory of Nathan saying her name. Across the East River, Nathan canceled the remainder of his meetings before noon, for the first time in years. He did not yet know why destiny had allowed one mistaken telephone call to find him, after so much time had passed, but deep inside, he felt an unshakable certainty that the wrong number had never been the real accident. The real mystery was why life had waited 8 years before asking him to listen. By late afternoon, Nathan Reynolds had exhausted every legitimate resource available, without crossing the line into invading someone's privacy. The prepaid telephone number remained untraceable beyond a small section of Brooklyn, and every instinct told him to stop searching before curiosity became obsession. Yet the sound of Amara's voice refused to leave him. It was not simply recognition that unsettled him. It was the quiet strain beneath her words when she spoke about her son. That single sentence echoed through his thoughts, more powerfully than any business negotiation ever had. Meanwhile, across the city, Amara Brooks walked hand in hand with Elijah toward a neighborhood pediatric clinic for a follow-up examination. The fever had almost disappeared, but she wanted reassurance before sending him back to school. Elijah carried a small backpack decorated with planets and rockets, stopping every few steps to point excitedly at construction cranes towering above nearby buildings. "One day, I want to build something that reaches the clouds," he said with the confidence only children possess. Amara smiled warmly. "Then you will need to study hard." Elijah laughed. I already do. They arrived at the clinic just before their appointment, where the receptionist greeted them by name. While Elijah completed a simple vision test with a nurse, Amara quietly filled out updated insurance forms. She had built a stable life through determination rather than luck. She worked as a licensed speech-language pathologist at a public elementary school, rented a modest apartment, and carefully planned every dollar she earned. Life had never been easy, but it had always been honest. Across the waiting room, an elderly volunteer accidentally knocked over a display of children's books while arranging magazines. Before anyone else reacted, Elijah hurried over and patiently helped gather every book from the floor.
"My grandmother always said stories deserve respect," he told the smiling volunteer.
Amara watched silently, her heart filling with quiet pride. At nearly the same moment, Nathan stepped out of a meeting with his security director after receiving one final update. "There is one additional detail," the director explained. "The prepaid number was briefly connected to an online pharmacy account earlier this week. The delivery address belongs to a pediatric clinic in Brooklyn. That is the only location we can confidently associate with the telephone." Nathan hesitated only briefly before driving there himself. He told no one where he was going. An hour later, he parked several buildings away from the clinic, uncertain what he expected to find. He had no intention of confronting Amara without invitation. He only needed to know she was real, and that the previous night's conversation had not been some elaborate coincidence. As he waited inside his vehicle, the clinic doors opened, and families gradually stepped onto the sidewalk. Parents carried infants. Children skipped beside grandparents. Then Nathan saw her. Amara looked almost exactly as he remembered, though time had added quiet strength to her expression. She laughed softly at something beside her, and a young boy stepped into view holding her hand. Nathan's breath caught unexpectedly. The child appeared to be about 8 years old. Dark curls framed a thoughtful face, but it was not the hairstyle or the height that held Nathan's attention. It was the boy's eyes. They were the same shade of blue-gray Nathan saw every morning in his own mirror. Elijah turned toward the street, smiling as he pointed at a passing fire truck. The smile was different from Nathan's, warmer and more open, yet something about the shape of his face, the way he tilted his head while listening, and the calm confidence in his posture created a feeling Nathan could neither explain nor dismiss. He remained frozen inside the driver's seat long after Amara and Elijah disappeared around the corner. Logic warned him that resemblance proved nothing. Countless children shared similar features with strangers every day. Yet one impossible question refused to leave him. If fate had truly reunited him with Amara through nothing more than a wrong telephone number, what if the greatest surprise had not been hearing her voice at all, but discovering that the little boy walking beside her might carry far more of his own story than he had ever imagined? For the next 2 days, Nathan Reynolds returned to Brooklyn only once, and even then he never stepped out of his car. He had no intention of following Amara Brooks or disrupting the life she had clearly built without him. Seeing her again had answered one question while creating 100 more. The little boy's face continued appearing in his thoughts during board meetings, investor calls, and quiet moments that used to belong entirely to work. Every reasonable explanation reminded him that resemblance alone meant nothing, yet his heart refused to obey reason. On the third morning, Nathan made a different decision. Instead of asking investigators for more information, he contacted someone he had not spoken to in years. Vanessa Coleman had been one of Amara's closest friends before everyone slowly drifted apart. She now worked as a family counselor in Manhattan. After several polite messages, she reluctantly agreed to meet him at a small coffee shop near Bryant Park. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, studied Nathan for a long moment, and sighed quietly before taking a seat across from him. "I wondered if this day would ever come," she said. Nathan did not waste time pretending the meeting was casual. "I heard Amara's voice a few nights ago by accident." Vanessa's expression changed immediately, but she remained silent. "I saw her afterward," Nathan continued. "She has a son." Vanessa wrapped both hands around her coffee cup without lifting it. "Then I suppose life finally decided to stop hiding from both of you." Nathan frowned. "What does that mean?" Vanessa looked out the cafe window before answering. It means neither of you ever knew the entire story. Nathan listened without interrupting. 8 years ago, Vanessa said carefully, Amara tried to find you more than once. After she learned she was pregnant, she called your office repeatedly. Every call was answered by someone who insisted you were unavailable. She mailed letters to your executive office. None of them reached you. She even went to your headquarters one afternoon hoping to speak with you for 5 minutes. Nathan stared at her in disbelief. I never knew any of that. Vanessa nodded. Because someone made certain you would not. Nathan searched his memory. During that period, Reynolds Capital had been negotiating its first international merger. His longtime chief of staff, Richard Hale, managed every appointment, every visitor, and nearly every piece of correspondence entering his office. Nathan trusted him completely. Amara eventually believed you were refusing to see her, Vanessa continued softly. She stopped trying because she thought your silence was your answer. She decided her child deserved stability instead of chasing someone who clearly wanted nothing to do with them. Nathan lowered his eyes toward the untouched coffee between them. Every word felt painfully believable. He remembered that season of endless travel, 18-hour workdays, and relying almost entirely on Richard to filter his schedule. He had never questioned whether important personal messages could disappear along with routine paperwork. Why did she never try again later? He asked quietly. Vanessa smiled sadly. Because she built a life she could be proud of. She became an incredible mother. She never spoke bitterly about you. She simply accepted that some questions would never receive answers. Nathan sat in silence as the weight of 8 lost years settled across his shoulders. There had been no dramatic betrayal between him and Amara, no cruel argument that destroyed their future. Instead, a series of unseen decisions and unanswered messages had quietly separated 2 lives that once planned to become one. As Vanessa prepared to leave, she stopped beside the table and looked directly at Nathan. If you truly care about Amara now, do not approach her because you feel guilty. Guilt fades, character remains. Before you ask whether Elijah is your son, you need to ask yourself a more important question. Nathan looked up. What question? Vanessa answered without hesitation. If the truth changes everything, are you prepared to become the man both of them deserved 8 years ago? The conversation Nathan Reynolds had imagined for 8 years turned out to be nothing like the one that finally happened. There was no dramatic confrontation waiting outside a courthouse or in the middle of a crowded restaurant. Instead, it began on an ordinary Thursday evening when Amara Brooks left the elementary school where she worked and noticed Nathan standing quietly across the street beside a small neighborhood coffee shop. He was not holding flowers. There were no reporters, no security team, and no expensive car waiting beside the curb. He simply stood there with both hands in the pockets of a navy jacket, looking less like one of the country's most recognizable business leaders and more like a man carrying the weight of questions he no longer wanted to avoid. Amara recognized him immediately. She stopped walking but did not turn away. After several silent seconds, Nathan slowly crossed the street and stopped a respectful distance from her. "Thank you for not leaving," he said softly. Amara answered with the same calm voice he had heard through the telephone several nights earlier. "I almost did," Nathan nodded honestly. "I would have understood." Neither of them rushed to fill the silence. Cars passed behind them, while parents collected children from nearby after-school programs. Life continued around them, with complete indifference to the reunion taking place on the sidewalk. Finally, Nathan spoke again. "Vanessa told me you tried to find me years ago." Amara lowered her eyes for a brief moment before looking back at him. "I did. I never received your calls. I never saw your letters." She studied his face carefully, searching for any sign that he was inventing excuses. Instead, she found only quiet regret. "I know," she replied. Nathan blinked in surprise. "You know?" Amara nodded. "I learned the truth much later. By then, too much time had passed. I had already built a different life." Nathan struggled to understand. "Why did you never contact me after that?" Amara smiled gently, though sadness rested behind her eyes. "Because I stopped asking whether you knew. I started asking what my son needed." Hearing those words spoken without anger, unsettled Nathan more deeply than any accusation could have. "You never hated me?" he asked quietly. Amara shook her head. "No, I was disappointed. I was hurt. I was confused. But hatred takes too much energy when you are raising a child alone." Nathan looked toward the sidewalk before asking the question that had followed him since he first saw the young boy outside the clinic. "Is Elijah my son?" Amara did not answer immediately. She looked across the street where evening sunlight reflected against apartment windows before returning her attention to Nathan. "Yes," she said simply. The world seemed to pause. Nathan closed his eyes as emotion settled over him in quiet waves. 8 years of unanswered questions suddenly became one undeniable truth. He was a father who had missed birthdays, first days of school, bedtime stories, and countless ordinary moments without ever knowing they existed. "Why did you never ask me for anything?" he whispered. Amara's answer came without hesitation. "Because I never wanted Elijah to grow up believing he was someone's obligation. If you were going to become part of his life, it needed to happen, because you chose him, not because a court, money, or guilt forced you to." Nathan felt every carefully constructed success in his life become strangely insignificant. For years, he had believed responsibility meant solving problems with resources and determination. Standing beside Amara, he realized responsibility also meant showing up consistently when no one was watching. Before either of them could continue, the school doors opened again, and Elijah ran toward the sidewalk, carrying a science project carefully balanced in both hands. He smiled the moment he saw his mother, then slowed as he noticed the unfamiliar man standing beside her. Nathan looked at the boy with quiet wonder, while Elijah politely extended his free hand. "Hi," he said with an easy smile. "I am Elijah Brooks. I do not think we have met before." Nathan gently accepted the handshake, knowing that the most important introduction of his life had arrived 8 years late, and understanding that earning the right to hear the word father would require far more than simply knowing the truth. The handshake lasted only a moment, but Nathan Reynolds carried the feeling with him long after he walked away from the school that evening. Elijah's small hand had been warm, confident, and completely unaware that he had just met his own father. Nathan did not ask for another conversation that night. He simply thanked Amara for her honesty and quietly promised that he would respect whatever pace she believed was right for Elijah. She gave a small nod before taking her son's hand and walking toward the subway station. Nathan remained where he was until they disappeared into the evening crowd, realizing that for the first time in years, he was not chasing another business opportunity. He was learning patience. The following morning, he arrived at Reynolds Capital earlier than usual and requested a private meeting with Richard Hale, the former chief of staff who had retired nearly 4 years earlier after serving beside Nathan for almost 2 decades. Richard agreed without hesitation, assuming the invitation was merely a friendly reunion. Instead, Nathan placed several old calendar records, archived visitor logs, and copies of correspondence recovered by his legal department on the conference table between them. "I need you to tell me the truth," Nathan said calmly. Richard glanced at the documents and immediately understood what they represented. His shoulders slowly lowered as though he had been carrying the weight of the same secret for years. After several long seconds of silence, he quietly admitted everything. 8 years earlier, Amara Brooks had repeatedly contacted Reynolds Capital asking for a brief meeting. Richard had intercepted every message before it reached Nathan. He canceled her appointments, instructed reception staff not to allow unscheduled visitors onto the executive floor, and quietly filed away every handwritten letter she mailed to the company. Nathan listened without interrupting. "Why?" he finally asked. Richard sighed deeply. At that time, the international merger was entering its most fragile stage. Investors were watching every decision you made. I convinced myself that anything capable of distracting you represented a threat to the company. I believed I was protecting everything you had worked for. Nathan looked at him steadily. "You made decisions about my family without asking me." Richard lowered his eyes. "I know." There was no argument, no attempt to defend the consequences, only regret. Nathan felt anger begin to rise. Yet it slowly dissolved into disappointment. Nothing Richard could say would return 8 lost years. No apology could replace birthdays, school concerts, bedtime stories, or ordinary afternoons that Elijah had spent growing up without knowing his father existed. Nathan quietly gathered the documents and stood. "You did not destroy my company," he said softly. "You almost destroyed my family." Richard nodded with tears forming in his eyes. "I have regretted that decision every day since I learned the truth." Nathan left the office without another word. Later that afternoon, he asked Amara if they could meet again, this time at a neighborhood park where Elijah often rode his bicycle after school. She agreed, making one condition perfectly clear: no promises to Elijah until we know you can keep them. Nathan accepted immediately. When he arrived, Elijah was carefully practicing turns along a paved path, while Amara watched from a nearby bench. Nathan sat beside her without speaking for several minutes. They simply watched Elijah laugh whenever he successfully completed another lap. Finally, Nathan broke the silence. "I know who kept us apart." Amara studied his face. "Did blaming him make the past easier?" Nathan slowly shook his head. "No. It only reminded me that I trusted someone else to protect the parts of my life I should have protected myself." Amara looked toward her son with quiet understanding. "The past explains us," she said gently. "It does not excuse us." Nathan nodded. "I cannot change what happened. I can only decide what I become from this day forward." Before Amara could respond, Elijah rode toward them with a wide smile and stopped beside the bench. "Mr. Reynolds," he asked hopefully, "would you like to see how fast I can ride all the way to that big oak tree?" Nathan smiled naturally, no longer thinking about billion-dollar meetings or missed opportunities. "I would love to," he answered, unaware that Elijah's simple invitation marked the very first step toward earning something infinitely more valuable than forgiveness. Autumn arrived quietly, and with it came something Nathan Reynolds had never learned to appreciate until now: ordinary routines. Nearly 4 months had passed since the afternoon Elijah Brooks first invited him to watch a bicycle ride through the neighborhood park. Since then, Nathan had never tried to force his way into Elijah's life. He never arrived without asking Amara first. He never brought extravagant gifts meant to impress an 8-year-old boy. Instead, he appeared exactly when he promised he would, whether that meant attending a Saturday soccer practice, helping with a 4th-grade science project, or waiting outside the public library every other Wednesday because Elijah had discovered a love for books about astronomy. Nathan slowly realized that trust was built through consistency rather than grand gestures. Elijah began looking forward to those afternoons without fully understanding why spending time with Mr. Reynolds felt strangely comfortable. They built model rockets together in the living room, argued playfully about which baseball team would reach the playoffs, and spent one rainy weekend assembling a complicated wooden bookshelf for Elijah's growing collection of novels. Nathan never mentioned business. Elijah never asked about private airplanes or skyscrapers. Their conversations revolved around homework, favorite sandwiches, constellations, and whether dogs dreamed while sleeping. Watching them together often left Amara quietly thoughtful. She had expected guilt to motivate Nathan for a few weeks, before his demanding career reclaimed every available hour. Instead, the opposite happened. Reynolds Capital continued operating successfully because Nathan had finally begun trusting capable executives instead of carrying every responsibility himself. For the first time since founding the company, he blocked every Tuesday evening and every Saturday morning on his calendar with the simple word family. No assistant questioned the decision. No meeting replaced it. One afternoon, Elijah invited Nathan to attend the school's annual family discovery night. Parents and children would build simple engineering projects together before presenting them to teachers and classmates. Nathan accepted immediately, then paused. "Should I come as your friend?" he asked carefully. Elijah looked toward his mother before answering. "You can come as the person helping me build the bridge." The answer made Nathan smile, because it contained no expectations beyond the moment itself. During the event, Elijah introduced Nathan to several classmates without hesitation. "This is Mr. Reynolds," he said proudly. "He taught me how to make stronger support beams." Nathan laughed softly. "Actually, you figured that part out yourself." Across the room, Amara watched the exchange with quiet emotion. There was no performance. Nathan was not trying to prove anything. He simply listened whenever Elijah spoke, celebrated every small success, and patiently encouraged him whenever a project did not work the first time. On the drive home, Elijah sat in the back seat, holding the small engineering trophy his class had received for teamwork. "Today was fun," he said. "Can we build something bigger next time?" Nathan glanced into the rearview mirror. "Absolutely. What do you have in mind?" Elijah thought for a moment. "Maybe a treehouse someday." Nathan smiled. "That sounds like a very good plan." Later that evening, after Elijah had fallen asleep, Amara invited Nathan onto the apartment balcony, overlooking the quiet Brooklyn street below. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Amara broke the silence. "You never asked him to call you Dad." Nathan slowly shook his head. "That word belongs to him, not me. If it ever comes, it has to arrive naturally." Amara looked at him with quiet respect. "You have changed." Nathan answered honestly. "No, I think this is the person I was always supposed to become." Before she could respond, her telephone vibrated softly on the balcony table. She glanced at the screen, and the warmth in her expression slowly faded. The message contained only a few sentences, but they immediately changed the direction of the peaceful evening. A prestigious children's rehabilitation center in Chicago had officially offered her the leadership position she had applied for months earlier. The opportunity represented everything she had worked toward professionally, yet accepting it would mean moving nearly 800 miles away before the end of the year. Amara quietly lowered the telephone without saying a word, while Nathan noticed that the future they had only just begun rebuilding had suddenly become uncertain once again. The message remained on Amara Brooks's telephone long after the screen had dimmed. She already knew every sentence by heart. The Pediatric Rehabilitation Center in Chicago had offered her the position she once believed would define her entire professional career. The role included leading innovative therapy programs, mentoring young clinicians, and helping expand services for children across the Midwest. It was the opportunity she had worked toward for years, long before Nathan Reynolds unexpectedly returned to her life through a single mistaken telephone call. Nathan quietly waited beside her on the balcony, without asking to read the message. Finally, Amara looked toward him. "It is everything I hoped for." Nathan smiled gently. "Then congratulations. You earned it." She searched his face, almost expecting disappointment or persuasion. Instead, she found only sincere happiness. "You are not going to ask me to stay?" Nathan slowly shook his head. "No." Amara looked surprised. "Why?" Nathan rested his hands on the balcony railing before answering. "Because loving someone means wanting the best future for them, even when that future feels uncertain for you." His voice remained calm. 8 years ago, your choices were taken away by people who believed they knew what was best. I will never make that mistake." The honesty in his answer settled quietly between them. For the first time since receiving the offer, Amara felt the weight of the decision becoming even more complicated. The following weekend, she traveled to Chicago for a final interview and an opportunity to tour the rehabilitation center with Elijah beside her. Nathan encouraged them to go without hesitation. Before they boarded the plane, Elijah hugged him and smiled. "I will tell you everything when I get back." Nathan returned the smile. "I cannot wait to hear about it." During their visit, the medical center exceeded every expectation. The staff welcomed Amara warmly. The classrooms were filled with advanced technology designed to help children communicate more effectively, and the surrounding neighborhood offered excellent schools, beautiful parks, and quiet residential streets. Elijah enjoyed exploring the city, especially the Science Museum overlooking Lake Michigan. Yet each evening, after returning to the hotel, he asked the same question. "Do you think Mr. Reynolds would like this place?" Amara answered honestly. "I think he would be happy knowing you are happy." Elijah nodded thoughtfully, but did not say anything more. Back in New York, Nathan refused to interrupt their trip with unnecessary messages. He focused on work during the day and quietly spent Saturday afternoon finishing the wooden treehouse plans he and Elijah had begun drawing together several weeks earlier. He knew the project might never be built, but completing the sketches somehow felt important. When Amara and Elijah returned 3 days later, Nathan met them at a neighborhood cafe exactly as they had arranged. He noticed Elijah looked unusually quiet. After ordering hot chocolate, the boy unfolded a colorful brochure from the rehabilitation center. "It is really amazing," Elijah admitted. "The kids there looked happy." Nathan smiled. "That sounds wonderful." Elijah hesitated before asking the question that had been resting on his mind since leaving Chicago. "If Mom decides we should move, will you be angry?" Nathan reached across the table and gently placed his hand over the brochure. "Never. Your mother has worked very hard for this opportunity. If moving is what gives both of you the brightest future, then I will be proud of her." Elijah studied Nathan's face carefully, as though searching for disappointment hidden behind polite words. Instead, he found only kindness. That evening, after Elijah had gone to bed, Amara quietly knocked on Nathan's apartment door. She was carrying the Chicago contract inside a simple folder. "Everyone keeps asking what decision I am going to make," she said softly. "But today I realized I have been asking the wrong question." Nathan looked at her with quiet curiosity. Amara placed the unsigned contract on the table between them. "The real question is not where my career can grow the fastest. It is where Elijah's heart has already begun to find a home." Nathan looked down at the unopened folder, knowing the future of all 3 lives would now depend not on opportunity alone, but on the quiet choice Amara had yet to make. 1 week later, the unsigned contract still rested inside the same folder on Amara Brooks's dining table. She had read every page more than once, yet each time she reached the signature line, she quietly closed the cover again. The opportunity in Chicago remained real, generous, and deeply meaningful, but another truth had slowly become impossible to ignore. For the first time in Elijah's life, he was surrounded not only by stability, but by genuine connection. Nathan Reynolds never pressured her for an answer. Instead, he continued showing up exactly as he always had. Tuesday evenings were still reserved for homework and dinner. Saturday mornings still belonged to soccer practice, library visits, or another careful attempt to improve the half-finished treehouse design spread across Elijah's bedroom floor. Nothing about Nathan's behavior suggested he was trying to influence her decision. He simply lived the promise he had made months earlier. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Elijah finally looked up from the wooden boards they were measuring together in a neighborhood park. "Can I ask you something?" Nathan smiled. "You can ask me anything." Elijah hesitated before speaking. "If Mom chooses Chicago, will you stop being part of my life?" Nathan immediately placed the measuring tape aside, so the boy would know the answer deserved his full attention. "No," he replied gently. "A plane can cross the distance between New York and Chicago in only a few hours. If you ever need me, I will come. If you want to talk, I will answer. Geography cannot decide whether someone cares about you." Elijah listened quietly before asking one final question. "Even if I never call you Dad?" Nathan's expression softened. "Especially then, love is not earned by a title. It is earned by being present." Elijah lowered his eyes for a moment, then unexpectedly wrapped his arms around Nathan in a brief, sincere hug, before running toward the playground to join several friends. Nathan remained standing where he was, overwhelmed by a simple gesture that meant more than every award he had ever received. 2 evenings later, Amara invited Nathan to dinner at the apartment. After the meal, she placed the Chicago contract on the kitchen table one final time. Without saying a word, she picked up a pen, turned to the final page, and carefully wrote a short note instead of her signature. She thanked the rehabilitation center for the extraordinary opportunity, explained that her family circumstances had changed unexpectedly, and respectfully declined the position. Nathan looked at her in surprise. "You do not have to do this for me." Amara smiled warmly. "I did not do it for you." She glanced toward Elijah, who was quietly reading a book in the living room. "I did it because success finally means something different than it used to. My career will continue. Opportunities always return. Childhood does not." Several months later, on a bright spring afternoon, the small treehouse overlooking the backyard of their Brooklyn apartment building was finally complete. It was not large or luxurious, but every board had been measured together, every nail carefully placed. and every laugh quietly remembered. Elijah climbed to the top platform, looked down at the two adults standing below, and smiled with the kind of confidence that only comes from feeling completely safe. "Dad," he called naturally, as though the word had been waiting patiently all along. "You forgot the telescope." Nathan looked up in stunned silence before a smile slowly filled his face. No one corrected the moment. No one celebrated loudly. Amara simply reached for Nathan's hand, and he gently held hers in return. Looking toward the finished treehouse, Nathan finally understood that the greatest miracle in his life had never been the accidental telephone call that reunited them. The miracle was discovering that forgiveness grows quietly. Trust returns one ordinary day at a time, and the strongest families are often built not by perfect beginnings, but by people who choose each other every single day after the truth has finally been heard.